Hey Phil, this is Cameron.
Hey, what's up, Kim?
Man, I gotta talk to you about something. Have you been watching the news?
Dude, what is going on? Pocket politics with Phil and Cam. Why? Why are we doing this?
I think it's gonna matter.
The only thing they want to talk about is guns and abortion.
My own views, I want to see the Republicans get away from the social issues.
I'm not saying that Republicans are idiots.
You hear something like that, it's powerful.
As an American, I was disgusted.
You could make the argument that you're probably more in the middle as well.
I think that's just a story that somebody's telling you.
Again, well, with the facts, this is true. Everybody knows
What
it.
facts?
So-
What facts? Who does this hurt more, Republicans or Democrats?
Boy, I've been thinking about that.
Welcome back to Pocket Politics. Cam, how are you doing today?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. So this week I got a chance to go to a town hall with some of our state representation, and it was a pretty interesting opportunity to look at local politics. Cam, have you done anything like that?
No, I haven't actually. I'm kind of, or I'm impressed, I should say, that you went and excited to hear kind of what your thoughts were.
Yeah, so it was really interesting. You know, a lot of questions about our kind of local community. Those districts, or that district particular, represents most of Kitsap County, and so it was a good opportunity to kind of have people address things like the ferries and other public transportation in the area, and then just kind of what's going on in local Washington and Kitsap County as a whole. So it was really neat. I would encourage anybody that gets an opportunity to go kind of see what is going on in the local politics, to take opportunities like that and go out and see some of that stuff.
Were the questions all local, or did they kind of branch out into some more national stuff?
The only thing that wasn't really locally centered was there was a question about Ukraine, which was largely unpopular throughout the room, got a lot of boos, and I think it was mostly just based on the fact that people wanted to talk about local politics and what's going on as opposed to the war in another country. So
well, I'm glad you attended.
Definitely. And without spending too much time on that, let's get into it. This week we are going to talk about the Tucker Carlson news related to January 6th. We've got some sanctions of some high-profile people, notably the mustache in Arizona and the former Trump lawyer Jenna Ellis. We've got some Mitch McConnell updates and some more fallout from Norfolk Southern train derailments in Ohio. We've also got a huge bank collapse. The 16th largest bank in the country collapses and goes under government control. That happened on Friday. And the Biden budget proposal. With that being said, let's dig in. What do you know about Tucker Carlson?
Well, so he is taking some heat over his January 6th footage that he aired on his show. And I say footage, this footage that he aired, of course, was material that he was provided from the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. He's got basically the narrative of what he showed on his show here this past week, portrayed January 6th as a, I guess, peaceful gathering, if you will, or semi-peaceful. But again, it was doctored to make it look as if this was just tourists kind of walking around, and not maybe as violent as what others had seen. That's what he was trying to portray, but he took a lot of heat for that from both sides of the aisle. And so, I mean, it definitely was, well, I say blowing up in his face. I mean, he continues to have a really popular show, but yeah, he took a lot of heat on that, Phil. I mean, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, and we saw the clips all over the news. Tom Tillis came out and basically said, quote, "This is bullshit." So, and he wasn't the only one. I mean, a lot of members of the House and Senate spoke out about how upset they were. And McCarthy, who gave him all this footage, which was already fairly controversial, kind of stood behind his decision.
Yeah. You talk about the clips, and you mentioned the Tom Tillis one and some of these other ones. Probably one of the bigger clips that we had was Mitch McConnell coming out pretty strongly, and we've got a clip of that. Why don't we play that?
With regard to the presentation on Fox News last night, I want to associate myself entirely with the opinion of the chief of the Capitol Police about what happened on January 6th. My concern is how it was depicted, which is a different issue. Clearly, the chief of the Capitol Police, in my view, correctly describes what most of us witnessed firsthand on January 6th. So that's my reaction to it. It was a mistake, in my view, for Fox News to depict this in a way that's completely at variance with what our chief law enforcement official here at the Capitol thinks.
And there you have it. So that is what the minority leader had to say. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think for one, obviously he sounded, pretty upset. Well, I say by McConnell. I mean, he's normally pretty kind of calm as he speaks, et cetera. But you could sense some agitation in his voice when he was talking about this. The other thing about it is that this was not Mitch McConnell at a press conference getting asked this question. He came out and without any prompting went off on this little rant, if you will. So definitely some strong words from McConnell. And as you mentioned, some other ones. As I talked about, the thing with Tucker Carlson is this guy continues to, he's climbing the ratings. I was reading he added 800,000 viewers this past week. I mean, he still is popular with his segment of people, but is this going to, Phil, I'll ask you, is this going to hurt him in the long run?
Well, I think it is, and here's why. We know for a fact that he's a proven liar, right? Dominion, while engaged in their lawsuit, their defamation suit against Fox News, have come out and shown the public basically a bunch of text messages, emails from various hosts, including Tucker Carlson, so where we can see his actual position on this stuff. I mean, he basically, has said that Donald Trump is terrible, and has also said that he's a destroyer of all things. Maybe not in those exact words, but I'm pretty close. And we're seeing this kind of behavior going on during the lawsuit. Is it damaging to Fox News as a whole and Tucker Carlson if during the lawsuit they keep engaging in the exact behavior that is getting them sued in the first place? I mean, I think that they're walking a pretty fine line with this.
Yeah, they could be. Like I said, Carlson seems to be about the ratings, and he continues to tout he's got the most popular cable news show out there. So, it could certainly be damaging depending on what direction the lawsuit ends up going. And you would also think that even things that they're saying in the present could still be roped into that lawsuit going forward. So, definitely potential there to hurt them down the road. I think it's just, right now, at least, undetermined, of course, how this will factor in as going forward. Because, like I said, the guy still seems to be very popular.
Yeah, and I will say though, this is not totally different from what we've seen recently with other controversial TV show hosts. I mean, with the precedent kind of being set with Alex Jones and the Sandy Hook lawsuit. Is Tucker Carlson also opening himself up to being potentially the victim of a huge lawsuit that's similar to the Alex Jones case from, say, the family of Brian Sicknick, the Capitol police officer that was killed, right? I think he's walking a very dangerous line with this.
Yeah. Well, again, that lawsuit you mentioned, I think, kicks off in April, or at least the trial, I think, does. So here in another month or two, we should maybe have some more news, or at least kind of see the direction of how all of that is going to go. But speaking of controversial figures, Phil, why don't we go out to Colorado to Jenna Ellis, who was recently censured by a Colorado judge. What do you have on that?
Yeah, so there's a couple interesting things around this. For everybody that, may not remember or may not know, Jenna Ellis was part of Trump's legal team that was fighting after the election to kind of get the results overturned. She was famously farted on by Rudy Giuliani in a kind of fake hearing.
Sorry, I'm just laughing.
And, I thought about... It's all right. I thought about bringing that clip, but I'll save it. But if people want to go look it up, you can just type in Rudy Giuliani farting, and you'll see the clip of him farting on Jenna Ellis. The thing is here is they could have taken her bar license away, right? And this this judge works for basically the legal regulation committee in the state of Colorado where she's got her bar license. The only reason she didn't do this, or she didn't lose her law practice and law license, is because she never did any of this in the courtroom. And so it's kind of revealing that, the judge cited, I think it was somewhere around 20 different instances in which Jenna Ellis basically told everybody that she was lying. But none of them were actually in a courtroom. And so that's kind of interesting. I heard a commentator this week saying that she's such a bad lawyer, that she knowingly lied to all these people and made up all this stuff. She lied on Fox News, which apparently that's their thing over there. But she's such a bad lawyer because she couldn't even get into a courtroom to do it, and part of the reveal of this was that a lot of those hearings with her and Giuliani around the country, arguing about, the results of the election, we find out this week with the Jenna Ellis sanctioning that those weren't actually happening in courtrooms. They were basically fake setups that they were doing in hotel conference rooms to look like it was in a courtroom, but it actually wasn't at all. Did you read any of that stuff?
Yeah, I think it sounds like there's a whole lot of stuff surrounding this Jenna Ellis thing. But ultimately, she's facing heat for it again in Colorado for her misrepresentations of the 2020 election. Colorado Judge Byron Long said she eroded the public's confidence in our elections. Now, let's bring this up, I want to point this out here, I should say. She did not lose her law license over this whole thing, and she had to pay $224 as part of the stipulation. Phil, should she have lost her law license?
Well, again, I think she gets away with it only because she didn't do any of it in an actual courtroom, right? And so the judge made a point of that. The problem is that while lying in a court of law is against the law, she wasn't doing it in a court of law. She was doing it in hotel conference rooms and on TV on Fox News, and various other places. So for that reason, I think this is probably the right decision by the judge. And keep in mind, this sanction basically includes the fact that she will have to tell any person who would like to use her and her legal services, she has to kind of openly announce that she's been sanctioned by the Colorado bar.
Yeah,
and that's probably not healthy for business going forward.
No, that's what I was going to say. That part alone, she does have this hanging over her head, whether her law license stays or not. You just mentioned it. She's kind of got this, big, dark, ominous cloud hanging over her. Yes, she got a little bit she made some news here this week. She got some publicity out of it, but long term, can't be good for her, I wouldn't think. But again, she's facing the heat out there in Colorado. Not too far away from Colorado, we had another interesting character facing some heat. As we like to call him, the mustache, Mark Fincham. He was sanctioned in Arizona, Phil, for, I guess, kind of just his fascination with, if you will, this challenging the defeat for his election, or the election last fall of the Arizona Secretary of State, where the guy, he lost by over 120,000 votes, and yet he won't leave this one alone. What do you got on this, Phil?
Well, it's just, it's more a small part of this trend where, these kind of radical conservatives all over the country are, first of all, being lied to about the results of actual, good faith elections and the results. And they're being lied to by a media organization that has basically admitted lying to them, but still gets traction. And it's also a media organization that was basically started on the backs of lies, right? Roger Ailes started this thing because he was upset about the way Nixon was treated. And so it kind of all starts with the lies. And now we get to this point where you've got a guy like the mustache who just won't give up, has zero evidence, and his, belief in public institutions in our country has been eroded because he's being filled all these bullshit lies from fake news organizations and probably QAnon, message boards on the internet and who knows where else, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, let's point this, or I want to point this out here. These sanctions are rare, so the fact that he was even sanctioned is, kind of newsworthy. And basically, what a court said was his allegations were groundless and not in good faith. And even if his allegations about this phony or fraudulent election were true, they wouldn't have changed the outcome. I mean, like I said, this guy lost by 120,000 votes to Adrian Fontes last fall. And ever since he lost, he has just been, one lawsuit after another. And he's been on, up and down the state and across it, you name it, trying to, cry about this election denialism. I mean, now that he's, basically feeling some heat from this, is he going to go away, Phil, or are we going to see this guy still continue down this trend and try and run for another office here in 2024?
I mean, I would love to live in a world where he would just go away. But the pattern with this guy is that it's not going to happen. So I think we're going to see him again down the road. And he's probably just going to keep engaging in the self-destructive behavior that's led him to this sanction this week.
Well, I'm kind of with you. I don't think he's going to go anywhere. I think he's going to hang around. He has also said, by the way, that he plans to appeal the sanction. I don't see that going well for him. His appeals and his lawsuits in the past have not gone well. So, again, Mark Fincham sanctioned out there in Arizona, the mustache, he continues to make news. Speaking of other news, though, we've got some news here for Senator Mitch McConnell, Phil. He's had some health issues. What do you got on that one?
Yeah, so Mitch McConnell was pushed by conservative Marjorie Taylor Greene down the stairs, leading to hospitalization for a concussion. I'm just joking. That's not really what happened. Apparently, though, he did fall, had a pretty nasty one, and was hospitalized for a concussion. The guy's getting older. We certainly wish him well. He has had several people kind of came out and made statements hoping that he would get well. Do we have any updates to his condition and how he's doing?
So from what I heard from, as of this morning at least, and this is Sunday here that we're recording this, but as of this morning, Senator McConnell was still in the hospital. What I did hear is that he is basically, going stir crazy, if you will, in the hospital and pretty much asking everybody that works there, when he can get out, etc. But what I'm hearing is he is doing, I guess as well as can be expected. Phil, you mentioned it, the guy's 81. And so, if you get somebody in their 20s, trips and falls, that's one thing. Get an 81-year-old guy who trips and falls and hits his head. Well, I mean, first of all, he suffered a concussion, but the recovery time is going to take longer too. And by the way, this all happened at a hotel private fundraiser dinner on Wednesday night. But yeah, he's still hospitalized. You mentioned it, Phil. People from across party lines have been offering support for him, including the president of the United States. And I'll go ahead and just read off this tweet that President Biden put out. He said, and I quote, "Jill and I are wishing Senator McConnell a speedy recovery. We look forward to seeing him back on the Senate floor," end quote. So, and there's been other things that have been coming, from various politicians, etc. here, have been saying things like this. But I will say this: Mitch McConnell, at 81 years old, he's up for re-election now in 2026. Now, it seems, kind of looking at this, like, one wonders now with these health issues and stuff, do you think, Phil, he's going to seek re-election? I know this is a ways out, but I mean, do you think maybe McConnell now, with some of these health things, is seeing that maybe it's his time to wind down, or do you think he's going to keep trying to go in the Senate?
Honestly, I hadn't put really any thought into that. I just don't know. I mean, who knows what he's going to be feeling up to? He's certainly in the spectrum of how many years people can remain in the Senate. He's got time left. He doesn't certainly have to give it up. But maybe he decides, that it's over, and he wants to, give up his clutch to hold power in the Senate. Some of this could also be decided in 2024, right? If Republicans don't do well in 2024, he could just call it quits. I could totally see that happening. But either way, the most important thing is hopefully he recovers swiftly, and gets that, gets back on the Senate floor and keeps kind of holding politics. Because I do think, while he's been fairly controversial in the past, I think at the heart he knows right from wrong, as we saw when he, came out and kind of gave the statement that we talked about with the Tucker Carlson stuff earlier.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, Phil. We wish him well. Thoughts and prayers out there for Senator McConnell. Shifting on to some other news here. We've got more news, I should say, from Norfolk Southern. Phil, what do you got there?
Couple different things. Shortly after, the train derailment in East Palestine, we had another one that occurred in Springfield, Ohio. And in looking at it, since the February 3rd derailment, Norfolk Southern trains have also derailed in Florida, West Virginia, Michigan, Oklahoma, Nebraska, and just on Tuesday, another Norfolk Southern train derailed in Alabama, which killed, hit a dump truck and killed one contractor. It's happening at the same time that their CEO is basically getting berated in Congress for poor behavior. And due to this high profile one that happened in East Palestine, there's, now bipartisan legislation that is being pushed through, which has a very high likelihood of being passed, that does several different things. It's, it's not a good look. So which direction do you want to go? Do we want to talk about the CEO in Congress, or do we want to go through the legislation? I'll let you lead us in the next direction.
Well, you mentioned the legislation. I mean, it is bipartisan legislation, sponsored by Democrat Bob Casey out of Pennsylvania, Democrat Sherrod Brown out of Ohio, and then Republican J.D. Vance out of Ohio, pushing forward with this to increase rail safety. That's, kind of at the heart of this whole thing. It's bipartisan, as we mentioned. Phil, I know you're going to go into some details on this, but I'll just say I think it's definitely gaining some traction there. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about some of the details behind this bill?
Yeah, so there's some really interesting stuff. I think one of the most interesting things is that there is currently a cap on how much the railroad companies can be fined for wrongdoing or issues. And last year there were more than 1,100 train derailments. Now, not a lot of those are these big high-profile ones, but they're talking about one big part of the legislation is to increase the amount that they can be held accountable for up to 1% of their entire operating cost in a year, which is pretty significant if you think about it. There's other things too that, the bill has, kind of some work that they need to do in the communities they operate, such as, better hazmat training. And then there's some stuff that I think is wild just because of the fact that I'm amazed that we have to legislate to get these train companies to do this. One of them is, that they have to have 2 engineers or 2 conductors per train. The fact that we have to write a law to make that a thing blows my mind, right? That you would that's like having that's like having the government have to tell airlines to step in and make sure there's a co-pilot there in case something were to happen to the pilot, right? All kinds of stuff like this is good. There's also a stipulation in there about, train cars that are carrying hazmat and how they may need to be improved. And then there's finally a piece in there that says that the railroads need to have a hot box every 10 miles. And what this is supposed to do is to measure the temperature of the train wheels, because a lot of these big train derailments are being attributed to overheating of the train wheels themselves. And so a lot of it's some safety regulation. Seems like most of it is common sense, and so I think it's a good thing. You have anything else to add to that?
Well, no, I mean, you mentioned the wheels. I believe that was the thought is, at least, as to what caused the derailment in East Palestine, amongst several of these other derailments, as you mentioned on that. So again, I said it, bipartisan legislation. I got to be honest with you. I think with as much as East Palestine has been in the news, and with as much talk as there has been around railroads and safety and all of this other stuff that's kind of, gone on, that's been mentioned as we've talked about these railroads, I got to be honest with you. I think there's going to probably be a lot of lawmakers behind this kind of bill. I wouldn't think that many, whether they're senators or congressmen and women, whatever, I don't think they're going to want to be on the wrong side of this one. I think when this legislation makes its way through, I think it should pass.
Yeah, I agree. And JD Vance is pretty controversial when it comes to the type of Republican he is in the U.S. Senate. But if you get him on board, and he's obviously very much on board with this as a sponsor of the bill, I think that signals we're going to see pretty overwhelming numbers in the vote tallies for this one. The CEO testified for 4 hours in Congress, and it was not probably a good time. And you can kind of see that he's not having a good time because they caved also this week to the 7 days of paid sick leave for the employees. So I think this is kind of a windfall for, the railroad industry as a whole. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it may very well be. You mentioned the testifying. That was the CEO, Alan Shaw. I mean, he was getting grilled by senators. You mentioned Senator Vance earlier. Well, J.D. Vance was attacking him, as was Sherrod Brown and other ones. Yeah, it didn't look fun. And like I said, he was definitely getting hammered. He says ultimately he's determined to make things right, and which basically the senators are saying to him, fine, you can say it, but we want to see this become reality. We're going to hold your feet to the fire on this one. And watching this go forward. I mean, Phil, you mentioned they're getting the paid sick leave that we were talking about back in December when that whole railroad strike was kind of ongoing. And interestingly enough, that was the paid sick days or whatever. That was something Bernie Sanders was lobbying for. And he had Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, and I think Lindsey Graham or some Republicans that were behind him. It's not too often that you see the likes of Bernie Sanders and Ted Cruz, I guess, on the same wavelength there, but they were on that one. So you know what? I guess there's paid sick leave coming out now out of this, and certainly more will come of this as it continues on. But yeah, I think this Norfolk Southern and the whole train safety stuff is going to be in the news for a while yet, don't you think?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a continuing issue. Hopefully we get this to a vote pretty soon, because like I said, I think it's going to be one of those one of the few things between now and 2024 or actually January of 2025 that is actually going to pass. Moving on to the Silicon Valley Bank collapsed just Friday. What are your thoughts on this one?
Well, I mean, it's certainly making the news. I'll say that. I mean, you got companies scrambling to figure out how to manage this after their bank shut down, and their bank, again, talking about Silicon Valley Bank out there in California. They only had 16 locations, but they were a big bank as far as one that served companies. Now, my understanding is they didn't have a lot of private everyday citizens with accounts in here. Again, it was revolving more around companies. Now, I'll tell you, some of the companies that were or that are into this, or I should say that were banking with Silicon Valley, or Roku, Pinterest, Shopify, and Etsy. There's, definitely shockwaves are being felt around the world on this one. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, it's certainly going to be impactful. I mean, also impacting small businesses. I heard something else that it's even impacting California's fine wine industry, because apparently they're banking with, or some of the fine wine industry out there in Napa Valley and such is banking with Silicon Valley. So yeah, certainly a lot of fallout with this one.
Yeah, and it's important to note too that they they are now under government control. I mentioned in the intro of the show that this is the 16th largest bank in the country, so it's not one of the real big hitters, but it's still up there. And it came out this morning that, people are talking about now that the Fed is weighing protecting all deposits that the bank held. Seems to me that is effectively socialism for the wealthy. But, if they go above and protect and back more than the 250,000 that is, guaranteed by FDIC, there is some speculation that this would have been stopped if they hadn't rolled back some of the Dodd-Frank legislation that, came out of the 2008 financial collapse. But it is largely speculation. So at this point, we don't know a lot. We expect to hear some stuff yesterday. But I heard some interesting commentary on this. One of the things that they were struggling with was the hike in interest rates, right? It was not doing them any favors, and they didn't really adjust to take advantage of it. And another thing that they were talking about on kind of the Sunday morning shows was that they weren't really diversified. So they didn't have a variety of type of client, and they didn't have a variety of type of investment that they were engaged in. And so because 80% of their investments were all based in the digital economy with these tech companies in the San Francisco greater area, that's a really dangerous way of doing business for banks. And so not being diversified definitely contributed to this. Any more thoughts?
No, I mean, I think, as you mentioned, right, I mean, I don't have a ton of other thoughts, I guess, but as you mentioned, there's definitely fallout with this. I mean, they were not very diversified. I guess the question going forward now, are other banks going to be in trouble, or is this just going to be a one-off thing? I don't have an answer for that. Phil, you may have you may be speculating on something, but again, I think it's pure speculation at this point, how this is going to affect other banks.
Yeah, so I've heard a lot of kind of talk about this could lead to more fallout. But I've also heard that the size of this bank and the way this kind of collapse gets handled moving in the days coming forward could really decide a lot. I don't see this kind of being a chain reaction like we saw in 2007, 2008. But it might prompt, further kind of strengthening of some of the rules and some of the safety regulations that banks have to deal with, and oversight in general into how they're practicing, right? We know venture capitalism is a very risky practice, and for them to be basically the main lender for a lot of venture capitalists out in California is troubling, right? They would, it's inherently risky behavior.
Yeah, definitely. So certainly more to come with this as we keep an eye on it, this and the other banks going into the future. Speaking of money, though, the president here this past week released a budget plan of his. This was a $6.8 trillion budget proposal, I should say. And certainly making some news with this one. The president says he wants to use this budget to shore up Medicare, bring back child tax care credits, expand healthcare access, and create universal preschool. So, Phil, what do you got on this one?
Well, yeah, he mentioned all those things. There's also some of the stuff that he kind of ran on. So he's, there's provisions in the budget proposal to make, paid sick leave universal. You talked about Medicare and Medicaid kind of being shored up. one of the weird things I think is it didn't mention Social Security at all, which his administration has been hammering down pretty hard lately. But maybe this is a signal that they're comfortable that there's not going to be any attempts at changing Social Security in the short term. Some of the other things were free universal community college throughout the country. I certainly think some of these things are very, very popular when they're polled with just the yes or no questions. But he plans on largely paying for this with tax increases. So there's, talk of a 25% tax on the 0.01 highest earners, which is up from 8% of the taxes that they pay. So he's almost tripling the tax rate for billionaires in the country and various other taxes. Do you have any information on some of that?
Well, you mentioned the billionaire tax, increasing corporate taxes, repealing the Trump tax cuts is another thing he had in there. Millionaires and billionaires already pay 42% of taxes or so, it's estimated. You're going to increase that more. Who knows? Obviously, that's going to get some pushback. I'll say this, though. This is likely to not pass this proposal. If it was, to even be brought up in the House and Senate, I don't see this getting through there. Phil, I think you and I have talked about it too, in just private conversation. I think you agree with me that this probably doesn't go anywhere. So is this more of just kind of him selling his and drilling down on his message, if you will, as he goes into the 2024 election?
Yeah, to an extent, I think it is, but I also think that there is some hope that, the House and Senate just will realize that we need a budget, whether it's his or somebody else's. Republicans are kind of coalescing around this plan from Russell Vought, who is Trump's budget director. But they haven't brought anything new to the table to signal that they're, trying to accomplish anything. For guys like you and me, are we getting to the point where we just want to see a budget, whether, like I said, it's a Democrat plan, a Republican plan, or ideally a compromise between the two? I think guys like you and me and your everyday person just wants to get it done so we don't have to hear about this fight happening in Congress every, once or twice or three times a year as we have to go into a continuing resolution because we don't have a finalized budget.
I think you're right. I think the average everyday person would like a budget out there. You said it, Phil. Give us a plan, and ideally that plan would be something compromised where each side gets a little bit, and then we meet in the middle, so to speak. Doesn't seem to be the way things work in Washington, D.C. these days. We can only hold out hope. As I said, right, this is a proposal the president's got out there, likely not going to go anywhere. I think some of it is him kind of messaging, as I mentioned, or kind of threw the question to you, but I'll just say it. I think some of it is him kind of messaging going into 2024. But Phil, also the other thing is, as you just said too, he can also use it to say, look, here's my budget, other side of the aisle, what do you got? And then see. And maybe that does spark some bipartisan work to try and get some kind of a budget going that we just haven't seen, in a while. So, yeah, this is hard to say. Phil, does this spark a possible compromise with the other side of the aisle? Are they going to come forward with a budget? And is the president and the Democrats and Republicans going to sit down? I'll throw that question to you because I'll just say I really don't know.
I'll be honest with you. I don't think so. Republicans in the House have looked over the past couple of weeks that they are uninterested in legislating. We've got some of the most important committees in the House of Representatives spending all their time not writing legislation and really working on talking about Hunter Biden's laptop and Twitter files and a bunch of other bullshit, which largely looks like it's the Republican plan of stepping on the rake and having the handle hit him in the face, every couple of days. I think again, I would prefer that we not have to talk about this every 3 months on the podcast. Like you and I already know we're teeing this up for July, about because we know there's going to be another fight
and again
in Congress
September.
around that. Yeah, and then again in September. I mean, but even for average people, like we shouldn't have to go month to month on a budget, like our government is the poorest of Americans, right? Living paycheck to paycheck. It just doesn't make sense. But no, I don't think the Republicans are going to turn around and try and contribute something. Like I said, they're largely kind of organizing around this plan instead of writing a new one. We know that plan has a lot of serious problems. The CBO had said, a year or two ago that it was going to add major amounts to the deficit and the national debt, and it wasn't going to contribute anything to paying for itself. So I don't really know why, where their angle of getting stuff done is on that front.
Well, you mentioned them in the House. You talked about some of the investigations, but I will also say for our listeners, there are plenty of other lawmakers in there, Republicans, Democrats also, right, that are going into their daily duties in the House that are in there trying to get some legislation through. I mean, yes, this stuff on the Twitter and some of these other committee things have been making the news. But again, ladies and gentlemen, there is a lot of people there that are trying to get things done. I read about it in some of the things, that I peruse and find in the news and stuff. You got to dig around a little bit to find them, but they are out there. But I also know the way politics
I haven't heard of
works.
any major. Yeah, I haven't heard of any major legislation on the Till, right? Like, I don't think the House has anything on the burners right now. The Senate does, but
their committees are working things, though. These things take time. There are serious legislatures in the House. There are some people that are there, as we've talked about, to get their sound clips and sound bites, etc. But there are, and I think that's important to understand that there are plenty of lawmakers that are going in there trying to do the right thing, right? And maybe not everyone agrees with their vision or what they think is the right thing, but they're in there trying to do so. But I also know how politics works, and I will just say this: I don't see both sides sitting down and probably coming forward with a budget. Phil, you're right. We'll be talking about this again in June or July or whatever, and probably again in September as we just go on to our 3-month Band-Aids like we always do. So, yeah, I think I'm with you. I'd like to see some kind of budgets and real budgets come forward, but I don't see anything big happening on this. I think we'll just kick the can to the summer and then again to the fall and on down the line.
yeah, and I'm fortunate because I'm sunsetting my time working for the government, so I'm not gonna be insecure about getting paid or having the regular benefits that we're used to. But now I'm looking at an angle from, am I going to be able to get into the national parks this summer? Are we going to be able to keep those open? You know what I mean? Yeah, I don't know that I have any more to say on it,
Okay, well, speaking of not having anything more to say, we've hit our topics here this week, Phil. I think we've had another good show. I just want to remind our listeners out there to like us and follow us on social media. Certainly interact with us there. Get onto our website, pocketpolitics.co. You can link up the podcast there, and you can also link up our various social media platforms that are there as well. Like I said, we're putting a lot of things out, so we love to hear from you, whether it be email or through social media. Ladies and gentlemen, though, keep it up and keep listening to this podcast. We appreciate each and every one of you. So, parting shots, Phil. Are you ready to kick it off?
I am, but I did just want to say, when you engage with us, please give us, the like and subscribe. Also, give us 5-star reviews on the podcast page that you choose to listen to us through. We really appreciate it. And same with YouTube, right? There's a lot of buttons that everybody on YouTube is asking you to click. We would appreciate the same thing. It only helps us get the word out more. Moving on to March Madness. So we are recording this. Today is Sunday, as you mentioned earlier. It is decision day. So later on today, we will have our brackets for the annual college basketball tournament. I can tell you, I'm really excited. The Jayhawks are looking great this year. But regardless of whether your team, has hopes of going all the way or not, it's a great time of the year just to watch basketball, enjoy college sports, and see what teams around the country bring to the table. There's always some surprises. I'm looking forward to seeing what's in stake this year. I know there's a couple of small teams out there that are doing amazing things, and we could very well see a major upset. I'm sure we are. It happens every year, but a team like Kennesaw State getting in there and taking somebody out. So we've got that to look forward to. Cam, over to you.
Okay, well, I'll stick to the whole sports world here for my parting shot. Some sad news here coming out of my home state, and that is that longtime Minnesota Vikings coach Bud Grant passed away here yesterday. So Bud Grant, for those of you know of him, he was as I mentioned, not just a coach, but he was also a famous athlete. So Bud Grant played not only professional football, he also played in the NBA for the Minneapolis Lakers. And so he was known actually growing up and even going into college as a 3-sport athlete, very good in football, basketball, and baseball as well. And so again, after his playing days were over, he transitioned into coaching. He had a lot of luck up in Canada when he coached the Winnipeg Blue Bombers of the Canadian Football League for 10 seasons. He won 4 Grey Cups while he was there. And then he transitioned that into the NFL, coaching the Vikings. And he was the most successful coach in the Minnesota Vikings history. And he, like I said, he did quite well, both NFL and CFL. When Bud Grant was with the Vikings, he took them to 4 Super Bowl appearances. He 11 division titles, 1 league championship, and 3 NFC championships. So certainly a lot of success there. And then after his time in sports, when Bud Grant retired from being a coach, he devoted a lot of his time to just the outdoors. Bud Grant's a big fisherman and hunter, or was a big hunter and fisherman, I should say. But he also, was pretty adamant about protecting the environment and water and things like that he knew were needed and necessary to keep, his outdoor passions going to provide that habitat. So again, sad news with Bud Grant passing away. Mr. Grant was 95 years old and certainly lived a full life. So there's my parting shot here, Phil. That being said, I think we've had another great episode. You got anything else before we sign off?
No, I just want to thank everybody for tuning in, and we'll be back next week, Cam.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. And until next time.
Bye.